Hello and welcome along to Talking Sport. We're back to bring you the third and final episode of the series powered by 11 Sports and iSport Connect. My name is Seb Coe. I'm a TV sports presenter and producer, and I'll be your host today as we discuss sports governance. Now, we're in the midst of perhaps the most challenging year sport has had to endure in the 21st century and arguably even beyond, as COVID-19 temporarily brought sport to a standstill. On the 12th of March, it was announced Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta had tested positive for COVID-19. The same day, Spain's La Liga was suspended for 2 weeks, as was the NBA. The very next day, all Premier League and EFL matches were initially suspended before being postponed indefinitely. Wimbledon cancelled for the first time since the Second World War, and within days, the UEFA Euro 2020 postponed to the following year. Question marks over the Tokyo Olympics soon followed before the inevitable postponement was confirmed on the 24th of March. But just as all seemed lost, with the sporting calendar a complete write-off, a resurgence. First, Germany. On the 16th of May, the Bundesliga triumphantly returned, albeit behind closed doors. The following month, La Liga was back up and running in Spain, and on June the 16th, top-flight football resumed in England. Within 9 days, Liverpool were crowned champions for the first time in 30 years, and July brought the return of Formula One, and we witnessed Lewis Hamilton win the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. The European Tour and Challenge Tour golf resumed in Austria, and Bayern Munich were crowned champions of Europe as the NBA, Rugby Premiership, and international cricket all returned in quick succession. Soon thereafter, socially distant fans were allowed back into stadiums in fewer numbers, while a sizable list of precautions still had to be taken. It nonetheless gave us plenty of reason to believe that despite all that this year had brought, we had got sports back, and that we would return to the heart of the action in the not too distant future when safe to do so. During this time, national governing bodies, event organizers, and rights holders had to ensure that sport came through this period as strong as possible. But what learnings have been taken through the crisis? What are the key areas in which sporting organizations must change? And what are the implications that COVID-19 might have on existing financial models of sport? Those, among others, are the questions we'll be looking to answer today, as we're delighted to welcome three very special speakers. It is my honor to welcome Lord Sebastian Coe, President, World Athletics and non-executive chairman of CSM. Some may remember him from his days as an Olympic gold medalist in 1980 and 1984, while others, I'm sure, lived through London 2012, where his leadership drove a successful bid to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games in the capital city before he took on the role of chairman of the organizing committee, overseeing the iconic games in London. Truly a titan of sport in this country and beyond, and as a Loughborough University graduate myself, it is indeed a pleasure to welcome our university's Chancellor. Lord Coe, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Next up, we're thrilled to welcome Alberto Colombo, Deputy General Secretary, European Leagues, the organization that gathers 36 professional football leagues representing more than 950 clubs across Europe. Alberto is a senior director with experience in media, in communication and marketing, as well as EU sports policy, public affairs, and sports integrity. Welcome, Alberto. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
And rounding off today's panel is Michael Cole, Chief Technology Officer, PGA European Tour and Ryder Cup Europe. Michael's responsibilities encompass business systems, IT and digital infrastructure, as well as data management and scoring systems, including the official World Golf Rankings. Glad you could join us, Michael. And moderating today's session is Michael Cunner, Chairman of iSport Connect. Just a bit of housekeeping before we hand over to Michael. We suggest you use the latest edition of Google Chrome for this session. Please get involved and say hello in the chat section. But if you have any questions for Lord Coe, Alberto, or Michael, please use the questions tab. And you can also upvote the most relevant or interesting questions posted by others in case you would like to see them answered. Please keep your questions coming, immerse yourselves in the discussion, but above all, we hope you find today's discussion valuable in the presence of a truly special panel. That's all from me. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sid, and hello, everybody. Governance is not normally a topic which gets the pulses racing, but I think this one is very special, and we live in very strange and challenging times. And I'm sure that when we hear our three panelists talking, we'll realize that that's very much the case. COVID-19 has really accelerated change in many aspects of life. Here in the UK, so many people are working from home now. So many people are buying online and not going into the high streets that it's accelerating change that arguably might have happened anyway. And what we really want to explore from these three gentlemen is that the same thing in sport? Is change accelerating, or actually is change happening that wouldn't have happened without the advent of COVID-19? I think it'd be fascinating to hear that maybe the last 6 months has probably brought more change than happened in the last 20 years. And therefore, for the executives concerned, that really is a huge challenge. Now, we seem to have lost Lord Coe just for a moment there. So maybe, Alberto, you could pick that up for me and talk about actually what happened in late March, early April, when suddenly the plug was pulled.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And once again, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Yes, I mean, the sport industry has been hit quite hard, but I guess it's fair to stress that the sport industry, and of course I speak about football and professional football, that is the sport and the game our organization deal with, has been responding in a positive way. Well, we have been all surprised in March when the virus and the pandemic has been hitting Europe very strongly. But football has answered in a very strong and efficient way as well in terms of timing. You might recall that it was exactly mid of March, if I remember well, 17th of March, when there's been a joint resolution by the four main stakeholders in European football, the federation with UEFA, the leagues with my organization, the clubs and the players, for the postponement of the Euro. You know, it was impossible to play the Euro this summer under these circumstances, but there's been an efficient, fast decision, and that moment was also the kickoff time for the stakeholders to work together to create the condition for the competition to resume and bring football back to the community and the fans. And it's important to stress at the very beginning of this conversation that without an effective cooperation and an excellent spirit between the stakeholders, and this was not given for granted, it was impossible to achieve the result that we achieved, you know, because, you know, and everybody knows working in sport how complex it is to manage and how sensitive it is to manage the calendar. But it was not given for granted to find calendar opportunities for the leagues to deliver and to resume their competition during the past season, and to allow them to play till the end of July, transforming completely the calendar, and also find the calendar opportunities for UEFA to resume their club competition in the month of August. Not to discuss about, of course, all the amendments that's been done with the support of all the stakeholders by FIFA, for creating the temporary regulatory framework to allow, you know, players and club to respect their contractual obligation, taking into consideration that the season was finishing 1 or 2, in certain cases, 3 months later than the usual one, you know. So, but the stakeholders have been responding well. The leagues that have the responsibility to manage the resumption of the competition and negotiate protocols and procedures with their authorities and government answer as well, and I'm pretty sure we can discuss this together during the session.
Thank you, Alberto, and welcome back, Lord Coe.
Yeah, the vagaries of technology, but my IT teams have now got me back on.
Exactly. Alberto was just telling us when the plug was pulled in late March, early April, what the impact was and the things that European football had to manage. You know, can you tell us what the same was in athletics?
Well, I'm sorry I wasn't following any of the contributions until about 30 seconds ago. But look, I'm guessing that we all come from the same ecosystem that had to be flexible, fleet of foot, and just think out of the box. In a way, our sport was hit as an Olympic sport quite hard and quite quickly, because the athletes were on an emotional roller coaster. We came out of Christmas with this sort of vague thought that there may be something, brewing as a medical condition that, but we were sort of, I think for most of us at that stage, we were thinking months ahead. Then it became weeks, then it suddenly became days. And within moments, we were sort of hour by hour, and then suddenly minute by minute. So the first objective I think I had as president of World Athletics was actually just to bring some certainty to the athletes, because having competed at that level, I just knew that there was a risk. And, we all represent sports where our competitors, by their very nature, are slightly obsessive, will do everything they possibly can within the rules to compete and to compete well. And the risk was that we were sort of almost encouraging them by leaving them in this uncertain space to maybe break, local health regulations, governmental regulations, sometimes curfews and lockdown. I had a whole heap of endurance athletes in Europe, in France and Spain and Italy, that were just not able to leave their house to even run. So getting them out of that landscape was actually, I think, did them a huge favor. It gave them relief, and being the resilient people they are, they were able to deal with the fact that the games weren't going to happen, and then starting, to be resilient, regroup, and start figuring out, well, what did they need to do? The next objective, of course, and you've all been in the same boat, is you don't just remove one event from, the landscape and assume that it's just like removing a piece of the jigsaw and then sort of filling in the space. It impacted on athletics for the next 5 years. Our World Championship schedule for 2021 had to move down the line by a year simply to provide accommodation for the Olympics. Then you suddenly end up with your World Championships in a year you don't want them, which then clashes with the European Championships and the Commonwealth Games. And we had the challenge of getting 3 of those events all into a 6-week window. So it started with, which I'm guessing all of us would absolutely openly say our number one priority was the welfare of our competitors. Then we had to figure out the complexity of putting the jigsaw back together again. And then you confront the challenges that you have within the organization itself. And within a few weeks, we're in Monaco. We were lucky that we had the generosity of the Monegasque government. We were able to furlough our teams. We kept them all fully. We kept them on the books at full salary. We made up the difference. And then it's then figuring out, how do you deal with all the challenges that keep coming at you? And you're doing it in a virtual way. And actually, I'm guessing that most of us around here would think that there are some lessons that we've absorbed for the post-pandemic world that actually leave our sports significantly more connected. I'll just leave you with one example. Just a week or so ago, I joined a congress for technical officials in Southern Asia. There were 19 countries headed by, India and Pakistan, Afghanistan, all those countries that make up that. I had 2,500 people on the call. Under normal circumstances, that would have probably been 4 days out of my world. I'd have flown there. I'd have probably done, I did in an hour, what I would have probably spent a day doing. And we had greater connectivity. We got to the conclusions a lot quicker. And I think that, we don't want to sort of regress to a world where we're just communicating by screen. But I said to my council the other day, look, don't expect me to sign off on people flying 8 time zones for 2-hour meetings and then flying back. And if we have a sustainability strategy, we might as well live to it. And I just think there are some things that have allowed us to re-engineer not just our lives, but our organizations as well. But the primary concern was basically getting the athletes back into training. And then at the latter stage of this year, we've already started the Diamond League circuit, our continental circuit. The first meeting we had in Monaco, we were very happy with, was we had 5,000 people in the stadium, but that took an awful lot of effort and resilient relationships. And hopefully we can keep the season going until October, but it is a challenge. And if I'm being hard-nosed about it, there is still no certainty about how our seasons are all going to look, next year. I think most of us are thinking about, well, if the worst does come to the worst and we have another hit, on our seasons, what is it we're going to do to keep our sports front and center? And you can be creative, you can create, pole vaulters doing garden challenges, but actually there comes a point where you just sort of run out of creativity and you just need to get your sport back center stage. Look, it's been the toughest challenge I think any of us have faced as in leadership roles in our sports.
Sure. Michael, golf seems to have gone and then come back quite successfully, but that's the swan on the surface of the water and the legs were going underneath, are they?
Absolutely. And, it has been incredibly testing times. Let's not pretend otherwise. And, totally echo the thoughts that Alberto and Seb have made. But, you have to kind of look at that moment of opportunity as well. And, we're unique in a way. In a regular season, if I can call it that, our down season is just 3 days. We run 44 tournaments in 31 countries, and we pause it a week in November, and over from the Sunday to the Wednesday or the Thursday, we're up and running again. So to some extent, to be pausing our season for about 3 or 4 months is enabled us really to have a degree of opportunity to focus on things around the business that actually we don't often get the opportunity to do so. Of course, we will focus on bringing the sport back to the fans. One of our greatest strengths, which is actually our global nature, it is also one of our biggest weaknesses in this COVID world, because the uniform operating model across all territories is just impossible. We've been used, certainly in my tenure at the European Tour, and working into Keith Pelly as our CEO. We've had a great period for 4 or 5 years. We've been absolutely focused on innovation and absolutely focused on growth in our industry, and then suddenly we're on a pause. And suddenly the management team become focused on cash controls, cost controls, revenue protection. In fact, at the period of lockdown, we were running daily management meetings purely around liquidity of the business. We hadn't operated in this way before. And then very quickly we were focused on returning our sport to the fans. To put it into context in terms of the impact, our sport is kind of predicated on prize fund for the players, because we're a members organization. That's why we exist. And also playing opportunities for those players. And for the first 6 months of the year, our prize fund was down 64%, and our playing opportunities were down 59%. That has a big impact on the organization. But we have been absolutely focused on returning the sport back to the industry. We've run a very successful UK swing, 6 back-to-back events that we had to put in place very quickly, and that was really predicated on the need to actually run our sport, not across multiple territories anymore, but in geographic clusters, because that's the only way we could mitigate any risk of quarantine for the players. But challenging times. It's changing our business. Some of that will stick. Some of it will remain, from here on in. So very interesting times, but I'm sure we'll get onto the detail of some of that in due course.
And for all of you, the break in your activities, did that fracture your relationship with key stakeholders? Alberto mentioned how important stakeholders are. And I'm actually thinking about contractual positions without giving any secret information away. I mean, I can think, Alberto mentioned player contracts. Obviously, the sponsorship, there's broadcasting, there must be hosting event contracts. Is that something that kind of came and went, or is that going to have a very long shadow and your organizations are going to take ages to kind of work through all those relationships? Lord Coe.
Well, look, I'm actually happy to report the answer to that is no, it hasn't. You know, all our contracts are long term. Dentsu are our marketing partners, so we have a relationship with them where we work in, you know, really in a 10-year cycle. So, you know, everybody was calm about that, and we got on with it. I think the biggest disruptor, it wasn't broadcast. It's not been our individual commercial partnerships. We've sort of got on with that, and everybody's been very grown up and supportive. I think the biggest disruptor was to the income of the athletes. You know, Michael made the point that, you know, that it's a prize money based sport. You know, for our competitors, it's pretty much the same. So once you lose that, and then of course they lost the bonuses from kit and apparel and shoe companies that, I mean, this year they would have been at an Olympic Games. There are contractual bonuses based on performance, even being there. So much of that disappeared. So what we created was a welfare fund, and we were able to. Look, we weren't able to replace every penny lost in prize money, and we had to be quite tough about it. You know, were there other subvention payments? Were there government supports, National Olympic Committee support? So we identified those athletes that were most at need, and we had to do that very, very quickly. And you know, I think we made a difference. So for me, the biggest impact and disruptor was really to our competitors, and that was something that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out. And for the competitors, it's going to be tough because, you know, as everybody knows, there's an impact on broadcast. There is an impact on those companies in our commercial ecosystem that invest a lot in our sport, and they're not always your title sponsors. You know, there's a landscape of support. You know, if you look at the shoe companies in my own sport, collectively, they're probably responsible for at least 300 million a year alone into the individual support of the athletes. You know, if their budgets have been hit, and they're going to then, that will then impact on the number of athletes they have on their books. That will also impact on the economic well-being of those competitors. So for us, the key stakeholder to really try and help here, sustain these difficult months, with the athletes themselves, who, you know, are not on big retainers. They're not in league systems. They're not members of clubs. They actually, you know, they basically survive on what they win and how they perform.
Alberto, football probably is a bit different to that.
Well, but it is different, but I can sign off, of course, some of the statement of Lord Coe as well. I mean, the world pyramid has been hit by, from a financial point of view. There is no doubt that the sport industry and football industry is not diverse from other industry. And whenever there is a crisis and a financial crisis, the small fishes are always the one that suffer the most. You know, so that we have, of course, been lucky to be able to resume our competition, most of the competition at domestic level. And by playing, of course, you can, let's say, fulfill your obligation, especially with the broadcaster. You know, but there are not only the big leagues in Europe. You know, we do not only represent the interest of the so-called, you know, top 5 leagues. You know, there are medium and small clubs and medium and small leagues all across Europe that are suffering also due to the lack of funds and the lack of match operations. You know, usually the smaller is a league, but the smaller is a competition. The more they rely on ticketing and hospitality and match operation, while the big one rely more on broadcasting and commercial, and therefore we have a huge responsibility towards the whole pyramid, towards the whole sport community. In the sport pyramid, in the football pyramid, we have elite football, we have professional football, then we have amateur football, and then we have grassroots football. It's fundamental that we keep going and we keep moving the competition of elite football, because these will guarantee the sustainability of the industry on top. But I guess that we have now, all stakeholders together, a bigger responsibility towards the whole pyramid. And that's why when we will have to take important decisions regarding the use of finance and the new financial landscape in the future, we will have to consider how important also is to basically increase solidarity towards the pyramid. Because if elite football and elite sport is suffering, let's consider also how is suffering the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah,
Michael?
Yeah, and I guess it's a different perspective on things again, because we are a members organization. We don't own the players. We don't have contracts. It works on a member's eligibility, and every player simply has a choice, based on that eligibility into our membership. They get the choice to play with the European Tour. They get the choice if they're eligible to play across the US with the PGA Tour. Of course, we collaborate as an industry with our fellows, but we do compete with the players, and the players do have that choice. They can play in one of 23 professional tournaments around the globe. They are independent contractors. We give them optionality, which so if you take this year, we have had to change some of the rules. We have had to change some of the regulations. So, for example, they will maintain their card into 2021. We cannot put onus on them to perform and maintain minimum levels of tournaments in a way that we have done in the past. By far our biggest challenge really was, offering the minimum number of events guaranteed to our broadcast community. Everyone has a different revenue model. Ours is predicated heavily on media and heavily on our commercial partners. In fact, the amount of money we generally create through our spectators is quite small. It's percentage-wise, it's single digits. Now, that's a very different model to the world of athletics and the world of football, the world of tennis. So to some extent, us being able to bring our sport back to the industry behind closed doors, BCD, to some extent, it's kind of cash positive for us. That's not a good thing by any means, because we all want to get fans in as quickly and as soon as possible. But going back to that liquidity, one of the reasons that we've been able to bring the sport back in a way that we have done is because actually we're building those towns as we do from tournament to tournament. We're not having to construct big grandstands in spectator villages, because the amount of revenue generated through the spectators in our world is perhaps untypically quite small. So the absolute focus is maintaining the commitment that we've made to the broadcast community, and also those commitments to our commercial partners as well.
Michael,
interesting.
I think there's another important subset here, and I think we'd all probably agree that COVID-19 has posed some challenges, but I think that the risk cloud is actually quite a complicated one now for all of us, because yes, we've all navigated our own way through these challenges, events being lost and revenues being lost, and how do you keep your sport front and center when it's been very difficult. But I think there's a manifestation that I've witnessed here, and there's political fragility. There's global political fragility. We've got three of the world's leaders, the most prominent leaders, who do seem to be very much at variance with each other. Remarks and comments that are made have big diplomatic implications. They have big implications for the money markets within moments. And by and large, all that impinges on consumer confidence. And, you know, as sports, we are all reliant upon discretionary spend. And if there is a landscape where people are politically unsure about what is likely, forget COVID-19 and track and trace and, you know, the need for vaccines and all the other things that will get us back on the road. I sense also that not every sport, but many sports are reliant on the largesse of you know, world-class programs through Olympic sports from government spending. Now, if government spending is being headed off in survival directions, you can see how there are going to be large elements of our ecosystem that are not just reliant on those commercial partnerships in the private sector. It, you know, with all due respect to the Coca-Colas and the, you know, the big multinationals, they're not building the infrastructure, they're not creating the world-class programs that funding helps sport, but it's that infrastructure which I think is going to get hit hard over the next 5 years, where governments are trying to figure out, first of all, how they're going to actually make up that delta on the amount that's been spent quite rightly to protect communities. And I think sport's got to be really alert to the fact that there are going to be pinch points in the public sector as well that are going to cause them some re-engineered thinking.
So in the environment where, as you very nicely put it, the global political landscape is fragile, and you've also had these months to have a complete fresh look and a hard look at your respective sports, what changes are going to come about? Often crisis is an opportunity to push through change when otherwise people might have resisted it. So what are the things that may be different going forward? Any one of you?
Yeah, I mean, just before we kind of get onto those differences, I think that there is an important aspect here around this government element and the degree of uncertainty that exists, because none of us today have a blueprint about overcoming these scenarios, and yet we are under pressure to, you know, with our management teams, to have logical planning and taking the right steps. And developing trust as we progress. You know, we have to build confidence with our key stakeholders. Typically, you know, we would have a board meeting every 3 months. Typically, every 3 months, the board come together and you know, adjudicate and facilitate over the organizational governance. During lockdown, we had board meetings every 2 weeks. Giving them the confidence that they needed, that we were capable of managing the organization through this, and we're not out of it yet, clearly. But you know, no blueprint, I think, is absolutely critical and needs to be kind of recognized, because it will be different for every single organization.
Yeah.
But specifically, do you think that your sports or sporting events will change going forward, and which will allow you to have more flexibility or really take you back to basics where survival is more likely?
Yeah, I mean, if I can build on the statement of Michael, if there is a positive legacy that COVID is leaving us, is that we definitely need in sport organization, and we have been quite successful so far, but it's a big challenge to increase the level of adaptability and flexibility, even in terms of the decision-making processes. And when it comes to, it is true that we have been improving the relation between stakeholders, but look, competition organizer at domestic level, they have been negotiating and talking with health authorities and governments basically on a daily basis. You know, this was never happening before, you know, and this is something that potentially could be also good to have a better understanding also at government level about the role that sports play, not only from a professional point of view, but the role the sport play in society, you know, from a amateur point of view, from a grassroots point of view. Of course, we defend elite sport and professional sport, and we want to deliver elite sport to the fans and to the public. But I think that COVID allows sport organization, both at the domestic and international level, to have a better engagement with governments and a better understanding of our mutual needs.
If I may look at a slightly personal view here, I think we all went into lockdown and the worst part of this sort of all flying under the slightly convenient. I mean, it was I use the expression myself, so I'm not absolving myself here, but we all sort of use that expression. This will be the great leveler. Actually, it's not been the great leveler. It's hit communities harder that are at the wrong end of the economic and social, social status. And we also know that those communities are less able sometimes to actually protect themselves. I will say this, I don't think governments in the last 15 years have remotely woken up to the challenges around income inequality and inequality of opportunity. I think sport sits really at a really good space. If you look at all the research, we've certainly been part of that, and most of the global research, it has shown throughout lockdown, and certainly up until relatively recently, there's been an 80% plus increase in global exercise. Now, for my sport, that's actually quite a strong asset, because most of that, for various accessibility reasons, has been gained through running and walking. But I do genuinely think that the challenge that we certainly have, and I think a lot of sports, and I pick up on both these points, is this is the time of all times to really reinforce the point that actually in a post-pandemic world, accessibility to young people, particularly in challenged communities, to accessible sport is absolutely crucial. And I think that we are actually best placed to do that than almost any other strand of activity. So I think there is a real challenge, and certainly in our sport, we're trying to figure out how can we hold on to all those people that have chosen to run during this period, and to make sure that they feel a part of our sport going forward. And I also just genuinely believe that, maybe for the first time, we've got prime ministers and senior politicians who I'm not sure have ever actually, they may have used them as warm words, but I'm not sure they've actually genuinely believed what they've said, but are beginning to understand that health outcomes, a good health policy, a good sports policy is an extremely good health policy. It's a crucial policy for social cohesion. It's a great economic policy. It's certainly got its educational shared values. And I think we're in a very, we're at a major crossroads here. And I think the more sport can talk to each other and actually create a really united front on how you access some of the things that we've witnessed, I think there's a big opportunity for all of us here.
Yeah.
Could I just bring in one or two questions from the audience? We have one from Mito Donna. How do you think new consumption patterns for entertainment and sports will affect the commercial interest of fan-less sports? Who would like to pick that one?
I mean, of course, competition organizers of every sport, they are working for the return of fans to the venue, right? I mean, this is priority. But if the industry has been very creative during the past years in order to increase fan engagement due to new technology, new opportunities, I guess that competition organizer and sport organizer now they have a good opportunity here to actually enhance via technology their communication and their engagement with the fans. So that I guess that we will definitely, as sport organization and competition organizer, need to further invest in technology in order to get in touch with our fans even more than in the past, because they are going to face, of course, an unknown period that we don't know when. We hopefully, as soon as possible, we will have the opportunity to have full stadium, but we have to keep communication and the engagement with our fans and our community. And for sure, here technology and new digital opportunities offer us a good way forward.
Yeah. you know, we have to face the facts. There is only one fan right now, and that is the armchair fan. And it's really put greater emphasis and focus on the TV product and that degree of engagement. And I don't like using the word opportunity in this time of crisis, but, you know, wearing my technological hat, you know, this has been a platform and a period to drive real change through the industry. You know, digital channels have largely been a very undervalued and under commercialized asset, and I certainly believe moving forward, you know, putting that armchair fan at the very heart of what we're doing right now, that there will be a total reemergence and a greater emphasis placed on the commercialization of digital engagement. You know, often necessity does drive that innovation, as we know, and this is that period.
I think, Michael, there's I absolutely agree with everything that's said there, and there's something that's interesting to me in all this, and I know it sounds slightly counter narrative, but I'm sensing that if we're talking about fan engagement, I'm sensing certainly in athletics, the athletes themselves have become better known during this period of lockdown than they were when they were sort of just in slightly anonymous competitors, because we've all seen it in all our sports. It's the one thing that we've woken up to most mornings is the most extraordinary creativity. You know, in athletics, it was, you know, American high hurdlers practicing, you know, their hurdles over water tubs on balconies in condos. It's, you know, and actually, I think whether it's because probably, and not just whether, but probably because for the first time for a long time, our athletes were off the roller coaster of travel and competition and buried in training. They were actually able to reach out to our fan base. And I think the real skill going forward is that when they do get back into the, you know, the day-to-day bump and grind of competition, that we've still got that access, we've still maintained their accessibility. And I think they've been quite surprised by the way that the fans have reached out to them and saluted them during what they know has been a really massive moment. You know, our guys have come back. We had our, as I said, we had our first Diamond League meeting here in Monaco just a few weeks ago. We were lucky in that we were able, through biodistancing and all the smart things, and with the help of the municipality, to average our athletes in. And we had a great meeting. We had a world record that had stood since 2004 that was ruptured on that night. So I think there is a, you know, it's a bit like athletes that get injured. You know, when you've been out of the sport for 6 months, you come back and you make massive progress very quickly because you're just so excited to get back into competition. I think this works for the fans as well as the athletes. But I think the real skill for all of us is how do we bottle that upfront and slightly closer and more personal feeling that our fans have for our competitors off the back of this lockdown, and we don't sort of lose it when we all get back into the, well, hopefully the roller coaster of normality quickly.
Quick question from Bill James. How will sports boards best balance the commercial challenge of the COVID recovery with the welfare of athletes? I think this is event planning in the calendar in particular, isn't it?
I mean, from our perspective, you know, it has been a tough period. As members' organisation, every pound we generate does one or two things. It pays the operations of the company, and it goes into prize fund. I mean, that's the model. Suddenly, COVID is here, and we've had to invest in mobile testing laboratories. We've had to put in place a bubble that we all have had to do and implement, and this comes at a significant cost. Players recognize that. Players recognize that this is about necessity, and actually, you know, whilst you put very strict protocols and processes in place, and you know, they can't socialize. They have buddy systems. They've got to test every tournament. They're firmly scanned. I mean, it goes on and on and on. but they recognize that they have no choice. This is about respect, and it's about the integrity of the bubble. And ultimately, this is about the future well-being of the organization. Coming back to your earlier question, there are things that we're doing right now that will stick. We used to have players come onto our tournaments and go into the office and pick up a lot of literature and physically have to sign bits of paper. That's all online now. So the whole way that we are conducting our sport has changed, and that is an ongoing legacy that will drive benefit, through our organisation, reducing costs, and that in turn will go full circle in terms of increased prize fund for our players. So it's all about the future sustainability, I guess, of the organisation.
I just think, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I think that has to be right. And, if I look at the way, we've all been having to make decisions, sometimes on little or no real quantifiable information, but, edicts get thrown down. We have had to make those decisions. We've had to make them remarkably quickly. The one thing I have noticed is that because we are now using the technology that brings us together, that most of us couldn't pronounce, 12, 15, 30 weeks ago, we're able to make those decisions and be much more consultative about it. I don't think there's anybody in athletics that feels that they haven't been part. We have member federation information sessions where all our federations come on. We talk about competition. We talk about outbreak prevention programs. It's been a very exciting period of engagement for us. I don't think our sport has ever been better connected than it is now. None of us would have chosen this to have been the platform to do that. But I do think going forward, I do also think, and I don't want to be sort of too rebellious here, because I think Michael summed it up. We do need to be respectful, but there will come a point where our competitors and our federations are sort of looking at the hoops that they have to go through, and also watching, people going, hand to hand over 30 bob t-shirts in Primark. There just does have to be some recognition that, yes, we will be, as a sport, respectful as much as we possibly can. But there will come a point where sport is going to have to make some decisions that it thinks is in its best interest. That's not to say you run roughshod through, local authority edicts or health guys, but I just do think that there's a real need for consistency across this whole landscape, so that you don't feel as a sector that you're being asked to do things that the average guy in the street is not being expected to do, with all those, with all the caveats of respect around it.
Alberto, I think the answer to Bill is actually in many ways a football question. Really, it's about how do you stop player burnout. As an armchair football fan, I'm going to watch football for the next 12 plus months, almost every day. But obviously, players can't play in every one of those matches.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, players' safety and players' health has to be a priority for all sport organizations, and it is for football. And building on what Lord Coe said, I mean, we are now even in a better position nowadays when it comes to the connectivity and the relation that we have in football, in particular, with the unions and with FIFPro and our domestic respective unions. And there is no surprise that during COVID, back in March and April, the very first step when we had to face the new situation was finding the way for the athletes back training in a safe way. So that is the priority, and that will always remain the priority. Now we are also aware that there's a very congested calendar. A very congested calendar in sport in general, and in football is a super congested calendar between domestic football, international football at club level, and international football at national level. And it was going to be probably quite also a challenge, taking into consideration that we don't know the evolution of the virus and the pandemic, and we have been seeing and experiencing even at the beginning of this season some leagues or some competition they have been obliged to postpone, or to change or to adapt the calendar in a flexible way. So that the calendar will be definitely one of the most important dossiers on our desk and on the desk of the football stakeholders and sport stakeholders. But for sure, we don't and we cannot allow a sport to further increase the calendar, but we have probably to better structure it and have a proper balance as usual between domestic and international sport. Also bear in mind that it's impossible for the athletes to perform at the highest level all year long. So the calendar is going to be one of the most important dossiers on our desk in the future. There's no doubt about that.
One of the extra challenges sorry,
go ahead.
I was just very briefly, one of the extra challenges, of course, we have in athletics, which I don't think is common to other sports that are here today, is we also have Olympic qualification. So our ability, we suspended that period of Olympic qualification from April the 6th through until the beginning of December, simply because we have other considerations. You want athletes coming back with Olympic qualification at roughly the same period. You don't want athletes that are in lockdown for many months suddenly, being squeezed out of positions because there are athletes in other countries where they've actually been into the pandemic, come out of it, and moved ahead. And of course, the other big challenge for us is to make sure that athletes are able to take Olympic qualification at a period where we know that our anti-doping processes are really in place, and you haven't got a period where athletes have been tempted to think of it as a test-free zone. It's not. There's a lot of testing still going on. So for us, it's the welfare of the athlete comes in many slices. Yes, of course, it's about burnout. It's, of course, being really protective of their health and putting them back into an environment that is safe and secure, and also being conscious that as we have fans coming back, we need to make sure that we're not sort of creating more hotspots, but also the Olympic qualification status. So although we've kept that in place for track and field, we've eased that off now for our road events, because we wake up many mornings each week with some of our bigger inner city marathons being cancelled. So most of those are now just smaller elite events, because the mass participation event has quite understandably had to disappear. And that's the financial model that those elite races are dependent upon. It's the other 40,000 entry fees that are creating the security of the system. So it's the welfare of the athlete, and also the challenge around creating a level playing field when they do all get back for Olympic qualification and hopefully their performances next season.
Final question for you all, and it's a very broad question. You can answer it whichever way you want. When everything does come back, will it look like it used to, or has everything changed forever?
Well, I'll go first on that one, Michael. It's kind of interesting because in our world, we are changing regulations and we are changing rules. We've had to re-engineer our business to many aspects, but clearly the fan doesn't kind of see often what goes on in the back room engine. But the analogy I would put forward is one that is quite active right now, and that's the US Open. So it's not my sport; it's the world of tennis. Because of COVID, less line judges, and they're utilizing technology to overcome the issue of fewer people actually at the tournament. Now, some people might take a view of that and think, actually, no line judges at a tennis match. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? But that is the level we're at the moment. These things, again, being born out of necessity, and the industry and our individual sports have got some big decisions to make in terms of, is this for a lifetime or is it a tactical fix?
I think that has to be right. I think that has to be right. I don't think it's a one size fits all here. I think there are things that we will have done during this period that have re-engineered our organizations inevitably. I think those sustainable brands, those sustainable businesses are the ones that have not just been managing their way through the crisis, but they've actually been setting aside space and time for their teams to actually think about what all our sports look like in 5 years, 10 years, even 15 years time. And I think there are things that we will take into the post-pandemic world that I think will be permanent, but I think inevitably, and Michael summed it up perfectly well, I think, we have to make a decision as to what are the things that we've had to do in order to survive, and what are those things that we can genuinely take forward and grow from. And those will mean big decisions.
Well, to finish, look, I have stressed during the session that the good legacy, positive legacy left by COVID is the level of flexibility and adaptability of sport organization, not to mention the higher connectivity and cooperation between the stakeholders. Having said that, we have been experienced during the past years a higher level of polarization in terms of finance in football and in sports. The financial gap between a few rich and the others has become bigger and bigger season after season, and the situation won't be better after COVID. Actually, it could only be worse. And therefore, we have, it's important to stress again, a higher responsibility to consider and to try to feed as much as possible the whole pyramid of sport in order to guarantee its long-term sustainability.
Hello, Sid.
Hello, Michael. Thanks very much indeed for an expertly moderated panel, as always. And thank you all for tuning in and being so involved and so engaged in the discussion. Now, tremendous amount of insights, as always. Lord Coe, of course, spoke about the welfare of athletes, even coming up with a welfare fund in order to compensate for some of the loss of income, as well as scheduling challenges with the World Championships being moved to 2022 in order to not clash with the Olympics, and of course the knock-on effect that may have on the Commonwealth Games. Alberto also spoke about focusing on all the tiers of football, not just the top tiers, but a more holistic approach across the football pyramid. Also an interesting comment about further investment required in technology in order to enhance fan engagement. And of course, Michael talking about maintaining commitments to broadcasters and commercial partners, whilst also perhaps looking forward and doing some future gazing and putting the armchair fan at the center or heart of the action going forward. So certainly very, very enjoyable indeed. As we do draw this panel discussion to a close, I'd like to once again extend a huge thank you to all our speakers. Lord Seb Coe, President, World Athletics and Non-Executive Chairman of CSM, Alberto Colombo, Deputy General Secretary, European Leagues, and Michael Cole, Chief Technology Officer for the PGA European Tour, as well as Ryder Cup Europe. And a big thank you as well to Michael Cunner, Chairman iSport Connect, for steering the conversation brilliantly and keeping us all engaged. As this is the final edition of Talking Sport, I would also like to extend my thanks to the brilliant team at 11 Sports, who have been fantastic throughout, as well as the team at iSport Connect, who alongside 11 have driven this series and given us some fascinating content on sports rights, on sustainability, and of course, closing off the series today with a panel on sport governance. Please keep across 11 Sports and iSport Connect on both LinkedIn and Twitter for Talking Sport content, as well as further updates on upcoming events on their social channels. Well, that's all from me. Thanks ever so much for joining us. We hope to see you soon. Stay safe. Have a lovely rest of the week. Thank you and goodbye.